You're listening to the To Be the Church podcast, where we explore what it looks like to truly be the church in today's culture. It's another Friday, boys. How you doing?
Doing well.
You know what I just thought about?
I'm good.
This is only our second video episode, right? Obviously, we've done a few hundred of these on audio, but we might have some new folks with us that are looking at this saying like, oh, who are these guys? Like, what's going on? So let's take a minute and back up about what would it be like about 5 years to the beginning of this podcast and why we started it, and then how each of us came to be a part of it. Andrew, you're the lead pastor of our church here, Northwest Gospel Church, here in Vancouver, Washington. So we're right in the Portland metro area. And you and I started this podcast, I guess it'd be about 5 years ago.
I think it was February.
Yeah. So literally 5 years ago. So we've done, this is episode 290 or something like that. So why did we do this? Why did we start it? How has it shifted? What's going on?
Yeah, I think the idea was, so you had been on staff, if that's 5 years ago, you had been on staff like 3 years.
Yep.
And I think in our first 3 years together, and I got here, I was just shy of 30 years old. And then 2 years into my time here, we hired you, and you were like, 27 at the time?
Yep.
And so I was in my early 30s, you were in your late 20s, and we spent a lot of time in our first 2 to 3 years together talking through theology, church philosophy, methodology, how we would go about things. And our church was in a period where it was really migrating, if you will, not like in a physical sense, but spiritually, philosophically, theologically, just really shifting, revitalization, but then a lot of other things going on. And so we were kind of, I would almost say sort of together, you and I, having a lot of DNA type conversations on not only theology, but also just who we were going to be as a church, the type of culture we wanted to build here, and those kind of things. And so I think 2 to 3 years in, as the church continued to grow, and we noticed that there were a lot of people newer to the church, and a lot of people that we would have loved at the time to be able to spend individual time with a lot of people. But it was sort of, so the need in the local church to have these conversations in a wider way for people to kind of be in on where things were going and what was happening there. But then also you and I just sort of working this out as well. And by that time we had this term, to be the church. I think that was like 2014 maybe that we came up with that. Yep. And so this is 2015 or so at the time, 2016, I guess, that we had always talked about equipping the church to be the church. And so we said, dude, why don't we have these conversations with microphones in front of our face and then, and start to, go that direction. And so it started there. And I don't even think we were really taking questions at first, were we?
No, I think it started out just more of a way to like invite people into the conversation, number one, but then also number two, a way for us to kind of allow the people of our church to get to know us in a way that might not be possible, like in a one-on-one basis with that many people. Yeah.
And should try to start and foster bigger conversations and dialogues too. And so I think that very early on, whether we like formally would do this on the podcast, whether like read questions, very early on, we would get questions from people that people would ask us something, or we'd be going through something as a church. And then you and I would go, we should talk about that on the podcast. And then we would, every Friday we would record and we've always done Fridays, right?
Yeah. And I think one thing that happened too, kind of early on, probably on like the 40th episode, when we started asking people for questions, is we realized that about half of our listeners were people here at our local church in Southwest Washington in the Pacific Northwest, and the other half were like church leaders from other churches that were, utilizing our context for their context as far as getting conversations going. And so we kind of shifted to where it was like, okay, like we're going to use our context, use the church we're in, but we're going to talk to kind of the broader church while using our context. And that's what we've been doing. I actually just did the math. It was actually 6 years ago.
6 years ago. Yeah.
Yep.
2015.
Yep.
Wow.
So
it's interesting too, because like when I talk to people who listen, they say around 2019, like the podcast just went to the next level, and they weren't really sure why, but like right around 2 years ago, like just the content, all that stuff improved. So yeah, it's just interesting, like the journey of this podcast.
Yeah, well, that gets us to my next question is, why are you here?
Well, let's go from the original intent to how to. So we got this original intent 2015, 2016, 2017 of like And I don't think at the time we were like, oh, this is going to go for 5-6 years. I think at the time, it's like everybody and their grandma starting a podcast, right? And so I think at the time we're just like, this is a good medium, digital media and these things. And in our local church, it really resonated with people and was helpful for people. So we kept doing it, right?
Right.
And then, like you said, the reach got a little wider, but there came a point where we're like, dude, we'd get a question from a new member at a church. What do we think about marijuana? Or what do we think about, what do we do this issue or this? And it's like, we'd go, oh, we got a podcast on that, And so we'd send them those links. But so then when we merged with this little Baptist church in Camas called Parkside Church, back in 2017, we started dialogues with them. And then early 2018, we actually did the merger, changed the name to Northwest Gospel Church from Life Point Church, and then became a multi-church church. Then over all of 2018, we're looking for a lead pastor for that church, right?
Nationwide,
worldwide search.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, what was it, 15,000 candidates, right?
I think it was like 14,500.
Yeah. And so anyway, so then when you're interviewing, dude, and you're like in that process, well, you were at a church where your lead pastor knew me. We were in a program together, a academic program together, and he already listened to the To Be the Church podcast. I don't know if you did, but when you were in the interview process, you were able to go back and listen to
I had a lot of time.
A few.
I had like 8 months to.
Ben loves how long it took, but I blame myself. But
I listened to a lot.
Ben.
When I was in Dallas, I remember listening to episodes.
Dallas,
back,
Oregon.
Yeah, when you guys were like not meeting because of snow, and like hearing Sam on there, and just like I was just going back and just kind of learning about. I heard the Nate Nottingham podcast, which I actually knew him, and now he's on track to be an elder. Like, it's just funny to think back. So,
but that purpose of this, like keeping the DNA as it develops, as it grows, as we talk theology, practical ministry, whatever, to be able to, when someone comes from the outside to our church and to become a staff member, even as they're seeking out our church. And this isn't just for staff members, this is also for members, for other people. Like, they can listen back through those and get a feel for who we are, how we respond to current events, whatever. And it's just that DNA piece. And so I feel like that was really, really foundational in you, not just because we're learning about you in the interview process, but you're learning about us as much as we're learning about you. And I don't know, did that help to be able to go, okay, these guys are I want to work with these guys?
because I would, watch a Sunday morning gathering and be like, okay, the preaching is expositional, gospel-centered, music, they're thoughtful in their song selection. But to actually get to know you guys, the podcast was super helpful to hear more of your heart, personality, how you guys were kind of processing what was going on in culture. And so, like I said, when I first got here, I feel like I knew you guys better than you knew me just from hearing you talk on the podcast. And super helpful.
So when were you first on the podcast?
Yeah, why are you here?
No, when was your first episode? When was the premiere? It's like he's like Andy Bernard, right? It's like a few seasons in, they bring in a new character.
They bring in the goofiest guy.
Yeah,
the Nard Dog.
The Nard Dog.
This is the second week in a row with an Office reference. We had Todd versus J.I. Packer last week. So
you're welcome.
Yeah.
You know what my first episode was? Yoga. And I had done a bunch of research and brought it in, and you're like, we don't really do the whole research thing. We usually just talk. So,
Yeah, and remember, it was like an hour-long episode, and we made the yoga pants joke 97 times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we couldn't make that joke now because we talked about how Ben was wearing yoga pants. And we can't do that because it's video now. I guess if we stay below the table.
Who knows what's on under the table? What's going on under that table? So yoga was your first episode, dude. And then because Ben's just here now. We come up here to turn it on and record, and he's just already here. He's just always in the seat. So how did you become a regular? Because there's the dude that comes in a little bit, but then there's the new character on. I'm also thinking of a Cheers reference. Woody Harrelson, is that the last name? How he was I think it was a season 3 or something. He became a character on Cheers.
I wasn't born yet, so I do not know.
So, how did you become a character here? Like more than just a cameo.
Am I a character? I mean.
Oh, define the relationship. I feel like I got to look at you.
You are on the poster. We have the poster
that made me
slide
feel
thing.
good.
Yeah, you're there. So
you're the editor in chief, Ty.
Yeah.
I tell Max to, hey, shoot me a text when they're like 30 minutes from recording. I'll get over there and hopefully get on the podcast.
Speaking of texts, Max, who's sitting at our production table right now, just text me, Cheers reference? That dude is ancient. So the whole point of this is get people getting to know us, right? So go ahead. No, go ahead.
I feel like we have something here in our second video podcast ever that we got to define. I mean, what? Because okay.
Why are you here?
No. Gavin Ortland episode.
Yeah.
I was who knows where.
Well, I know where.
I was out.
We had the COVIDs.
They had the COVIDs. I had an appointment that I wasn't watching the clock.
Steak bites and dirty fries.
I did at Pacific House.
Yep.
Your little shout out to across the parking lot friends there.
Yep.
So what? And you carried that episode. I mean, there's another guy on there. He's forgettable, but you. That's right, Max. You I mean, you were the lead interviewer there, right? So
my back still hurts from carrying this podcast that week. It's like, hey.
So do we make the? I mean, should we officially make this official? Like,
you want me to leave? Is this?
I feel like I'm sensing from Ben an insecurity on his place in the To Be the Church podcast. And I think
to solidify this?
I think we need to solidify this.
I'm cool with that, mainly because I think a 2-person video podcast would just be a lot less interesting.
Okay.
And you're what we got.
You're the third guy.
All right.
This is a 3-man this is a 3-man operation now, right? Well, it's like a 9-man operation now.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm honored.
But you need to change your Instagram bio to co-host of the To Be the Church podcast. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I mean, if you had an Instagram, you should definitely do that.
Yeah, it's true.
You don't have any social media.
Well, now that this is okay. Now that this is kind of scheduled,
welcome to the team.
I'll be here, and I'll be here. I'll be ready.
All right, so let's do a little bit of more get to know you.
Okay.
Ben, you've been around here for a couple years now.
Mm-hmm.
You're the lead pastor of our Camas Washougal campus, and it's
we
use a multi-church model to where like you're not like the guy introing the video every week, sermon wise. You are preaching live there every week. Like you were the pastor of that local church. Andrew, you are the lead pastor here at East Vancouver of our of Northwest Gospel Church here. I'm one of the pastors. I came here 8 years ago, like we said, as the music pastor and transitioned into more of an executive role over ministries. Let's talk about your families for a minute.
All
right. Ben, do you have any children? I know the answer to this.
I do. I have 3 kids. Peyton is our daughter. She's our oldest. She's 8. And then Titus and Marty, 6 and 3, 2 boys.
Right on. And how long have you and Andrea been married?
12 years.
Nice.
Going on 13.
Andrew, what about you?
That's awesome. Married to Carissa, 16, coming on 17 years this August. And 4 kids, all girls. 4 girls, 13 down to age 5. Olivia, Sophia, Amelia, and Viola, dude.
Right
and
on.
2 dogs.
Yeah, and 2 dogs.
Yeah, Cruz and Zoe.
So my family, we have 2 rabbits, and why is that funny?
Do they procreate, the rabbits?
I hope not, because they're siblings.
Oh,
but,
that's pretty bad.
So
you live in the Shug, though.
Katie and I have been married for 15 years, and we have 4 kids as well.
You guys got married really young.
Yeah, we did. She was 19, I was 20.
Yeah.
A
couple of kids, man.
Yep.
Setting out on their own in that world, big dark world.
Yeah, we actually didn't go on a honeymoon because we couldn't rent a car. So, but yeah, so we have 4 kids, 2 girls, 2 boys, aged 10, 6, 4, and almost 2. So that's a little bit about us if you're watching for the first time on video and you are you're new with us. But what we do here is we usually take a listener question. And so, Brian, what do we got today?
Let's see. We've got, I hear you guys talk about musical worship instead of just worship. Why? Is that a theological thing or just a Pacific Northwest cultural thing?
Ooh.
That's a good question. I actually just went over this with a few new team members over the last couple of weeks, and so it's nice and fresh in the mind. And so the quick answer to the question is it's definitely it's a theological thing. It's an ecclesiological thing. It's also just it's a
doxological thing.
Yeah, it's a doxological thing for sure. And it really comes from this idea, and the reason we're like pretty
anal about it.
Yeah, I was like trying to find a better word, but that's the only word that comes to mind. But the reason we are is because the word worship has been like shrunken down into like a musical genre for most of American Christianity, to where if somebody says the word worship, you instantly think of Hillsong or Chris Tomlin or whatever, your flavor is, not the holistic view of the word worship. And so, I don't know, my favorite definition of the word worship comes from Tim Keller, where he says that worship is the act of ascribing ultimate value to something in a way that engages your entire person or being. And so if you use that definition, and Harold Best has a great book on this called Unceasing Worship.
Yep.
If you use that definition, every human is worshiping all the time, right? Like we're all ascribing ultimate value to something. Something is at the top of the list. And that might be family, that might be your job. That might be something that is like far less honorable than those, things like, sin things, stuff like that. But for Christians, it is our desire, our hope, our goal to, for that ultimate value to be Christ, right? And this is something we're striving toward. Christian worship is the act of ascribing ultimate value to Christ. And so, so this is really important because think about it in like the idea of concentric circles. So there's like human worship, and then the circle inside of that there's Christian worship. And so Christians are trying to do this at all times. So when we're recording this podcast, we desire to glorify God. We're doing that same thing when we're eating dinner with our families at home, whenever you're at school, whenever you're at work, whenever you're in conversation. The goal should be to glorify God in all things, and that is Christian worship. And I'll talk about two more circles here in a minute, but first, I think it's a huge bummer whenever someone is striving to do that and then has this idea that they don't like to worship because they aren't into a specific style of music or don't really resonate emotionally with the stuff that goes on Sunday morning when their church band is singing. And so like that, I can pose the question, and it's somewhat rhetorical, but is the guy who is really intentional with trying to glorify God in all of his life, but not super into music on Sunday morning, is he less of a worshiper, less of a Christian worshiper than the person who gives little thought to the holistic Christian worship, but is super passionate on Sunday morning?
Yeah, I think the guy you're talking about is more of a worshiper if he's seen his lifestyle as worship rather than simply like a moment of singing a couple songs. You mentioned Harold Best's book, great, Keller's definition. Romans 12:1, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship or service, right? And this is one of the reasons that truncating down the concept of worship and making it synonymous with like the songs you sing on Sunday, like a one-for-one correspondence there, that does include worship. That's a part of worship, right? Singing music is a part of your worship to God, not just on Sundays, but anytime. And yet making those two synonymous, which that would be a critique of ours theologically on American Christianity, that's been that experiential moment with the gathered body or the experiential moment of you singing in your car, that we think of that as worship, and we don't think of the way we handle our sexuality as worship, or the way we handle our money as worship, or how we parent, or the way we work in our jobs. And again, we're not trying to create a straw man here that we simply burn to the ground, but it's a misapplication and misdefinition, if you will, of the term worship to just simply say, well, we worship and then we preach. Preaching is worship. So would
you guys say that for you two specifically, though, it's a little bit you push back against it a little bit more because of your background and maybe that part of a gathering being really kind of rooted in experientialism and emotionalism, and that being something that was seen as different than your day-to-day worship? Because I totally agree, and I'm in as an NGC pastor, we call it musical worship, and I love that. I think for me, like a lot of people I know that call it that, it's more just because like that's like the genre of music they're thinking of. Music that worships God is what they're talking about. And so they're not, by calling that music worship, saying that's the only time they're worshiping. It's just kind of a word that they use. So I'm wondering, because like I agree and do it, but I don't feel like I have maybe as much baggage with that word as you guys do when in connection with the church.
Well,
or the word has baggage for you, not you have the baggage.
I'd put it in the Christianese category. We often talk about here. I think using the term worship almost exclusively to refer to musical time is a Christianese idea that we're trying to push back against and trying to almost, if you will, rescue the biblical concept of worship as all of life. Worship as, Tyler, you've said many times, I don't know if this is you or you pulled this from somewhere, but the 24/7, 365 reality of the Christian life, right? That's what this means to be a Christian is to ascribe ultimate worth to God in the way we live our lives. And so I don't know. I don't know if some of that comes from that Pentecostal charismatic background that Tyler and I have in terms of that experiential thing. I hear it from Christians of all different backgrounds, and it's always been a really irksome thing for me. And I don't know if that's because of some of that baggage perhaps there of the over-experiential deal, or if it's just a very important concept theologically that I think in the vacuous world of American Christianity that truncates down a lot of things, truncates down the idea of church or the idea of worship or whatever else into a compartmentalized or non-biblical application rather than a more holistic biblical framework. That's I'm trying to work against that, I think, with people.
Well, I appreciate how you guys, when I came here and I heard the term musical worship, because you're not saying that what we do on Sundays when we sing is not worship. Yeah. It is worship. It's just a form of worship with singing. So I think that's helpful. That kind of like I like using the word worship in regards to that. I think it's even better when you add musical to it because it says this is just a form of worship. It's not the only way.
Yeah. One thing I'd say directly back to what you were just saying a minute ago is that I think that anybody who just calls worship a style of music has you said truncated is a good word for it, but has an incomplete view of like how you can glorify God through art. And this idea that like this style of music, by calling it worship, is subtly implying that it is more worshipful than another style of music or another art form. To where I would push back on that, and no one's doing that blatantly, but that's kind of what's implied by calling it that. But then I think to your broader point about maybe our backgrounds, I think that the concentric circles are helpful. So we have the human worship, right, that all humans are doing. You have Christian worship, the Christian life, Romans 12:1, and then the two circles inside that. You have gathered worship, which is what happens when the church gets together. And I think that while maybe where we came from emphasizes the fourth circle, musical worship, or singing, where, our background does that. I think that maybe some of the more Bobby Baptist type backgrounds like yours or liturgical backgrounds.
Robert Baptist, yes.
Robert J. Baptist. But I think that some of the more liturgical backgrounds would almost emphasize number 3, like to where worship is the gathering. And so I helped out and served in a more of a high liturgy church for a while. Like they were kind of doing a liturgical in blue jeans, high church in blue jeans type.
Like high liturgy or
no, highly liturgical.
You got to check it out these days.
And so, but I helped out there, and they simply called the whole gathering worship. We are here for worship, and which is true. Yeah, still, But I think that the problem remains the same, regardless of whether you're just talking about music as worship or the gathering as worship. Now, I think music as worship is a bit more glaring because it's like, oh, worship just ended. Now let's listen to the sermon. What?
Yeah.
What I mean? But I think you could make the same statement. Worship just ended. Now let's go to lunch. Yeah. What? And so I think
worship is a good way to put that.
Yeah. And so I think that those 4 concentric circles are helpful. You have Christian worship, which is what we're trying to do all the time. And remember, they're concentric circles. They're not, the Olympic rings overlapping each other.
Oh, man. Come on, son.
Gathered worship is inside of Christian worship, and musical worship is inside of gathered worship because these are elements of worship that happen. And I think that...
Quit staring at me.
I'm trying to figure out if you're a late adopter here to it. Come on, push back. Hi, C.
One of many things here.
Oh, buddy. Anyway, sorry. Keep
No, I think that they're important. All of them are important. And I think that the concentric circles can be really helpful with new believers. And they're like, oh man, I realize that I'm a sinner. I realize that I need Jesus to save me. How should my life look different now? And I think you are to live a life of worship. New Christian reads Romans 12:1, Romans 12, 12:1 and 2, or that whole just section of Romans, they read that, and if their mind is that worship is the 20 minutes of singing before the sermon, there's some construction going on downstairs. But if that's their view of what worship is, then if they're into it, they're like, oh, I got this.
Yeah,
I can do this. And there's definitely benefits of listening to musical worship throughout your day. And we're not saying at all that this diminishes the value of it, but if that's all that it is to them, then they are either going to feel like a super inflated sense of like, oh, I got this Christian life thing because I really enjoy this and feel emotional about it, or they're going to feel really less than, where it's like, oh, my life is supposed to be worship. I really don't like this style of music. And so when it's, truncated, again, great word, down to a genre of music, it can be really damaging. And so I think that new Christians need that holistic view. So it's like, oh man, what have you been worshiping?
Yeah.
Focus that. Sometimes we do that together. Sometimes we do that when we sing.
I guess I just don't assume that everyone who says worship in regards to singing has that truncated view. Right?
I don't think they do.
And I don't want the
I think they do.
Well, you're wrong. The fear would be, or like the hesitation would be, I don't want like Christians to have a false guilt because they say I'm going to worship in the morning on Saturday night. Like, oh, wait a second. Like, because someone could be just like, I'm going to hear the word and preach and heard the word preached and take communion and all of its worship. And then I'm going to go and worship. And so again, it's that pendulum swinging maybe a little bit. That's why I was wondering if from you guys, it was more responsive to something.
Yeah.
But how you feel about that is how I felt about our yoga episode. No, I get what you're saying, but I think language is super important,
for sure,
especially when it comes to theological things. Yeah. And so,
I agree with the language and the precision that's necessary.
And this is a good way to maybe bookend as we wrap this second video episode, and we're getting to know one another, or the people are getting to know us a little bit more. And because we had those kind of family intros and stuff. The intro too to how we grew. You grew up in a more doctrinally precise background, right? So than we did. I mean,
ultra conservative.
You definitely did.
Legalistic Baptist.
Yeah, but it was like there was more doctrinal, even in the sense of just biblical accuracy there. Than we grew up in a lot more of a Wild West type of situation. So I think when we hear a truncated definition of something that needs to be more precise from Scripture, that maybe for us is one that we're like, that needs to be defined and precise because there's so much error in that world. Whereas you go, like our world, it was like so much was assumed and undefined, whereas your world was maybe more. There was more clarity there. There was more connectivity to orthodoxy from Scripture, and so it's not as much of a point of or an issue that you go, because like when you hear somebody say, "Hey, I'm going to go to worship in the morning," if I heard that from somebody growing up, it would be, "I'm going to go sing in the morning." It wouldn't be gathered. I don't even think the concept of like worship as the gathering all together. I think worship was pitted against other elements in the liturgy. And then it would be like, what's the word liturgy mean? So that's the world we kind of grew up in.
That's why this is all helpful. I'm going to start NGC 101 soon the lexicon is week 1 talking about that stuff. And like, that's important. Like we need to define our terms because people do lack clarity, and then it does impact, the way they live and the way they practice their faith. So
well, let's wrap this up. So, you can get a hold of us. podcast@tobethechurch.com is the way to do that. You can send in a question, send in your thoughts. About half the emails we get to that email address are like legit questions that come on the podcast, and about half of them are just people like telling us their thoughts about what we said, which is always fun. So send those in. If you are listening on your podcast app right now and you'd like to check us out on YouTube, youtube.com/tobethechurch, or if you're watching on YouTube and you want to listen to it just audio next time, anywhere you find podcasts, just search the To Be the Church podcast, and we'll see you next weekend. Have a good one.